This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. Today I'm revisiting a topic I've done before, Anthems, but I did it a really long time ago. All the way back in April of 2016. It was the 6th MTG Top 10 I ever did, and back then, I hadn't really figured out how I wanted to do them. I didn't use a point system back then, and the video was mostly opinion-based. As a result, even though I've done the topic before, there are lots of cards on here that weren't on it last time, which is also partly a result of some new cards being printed. So what is an Anthem? Well, it's a card that does something like Glorious Anthem does. In other words, it has to be an effect that raises both the toughness and power of all your creatures as a static ability. They are particularly potent in aggressive go-wide decks where they add a ton of damage to the board the turn they come down. I want to mention though, that effects that only raise power or only raise toughness don't count as Anthems in this video. The card has to raise both. Another type of card that doesn't make the list are those that pump only specific types of creatures, whether it's a card that pumps all creatures of a chosen type or of a specific color. Basically, to be eligible for this list, a card had to have that static ability that raises both power and toughness, and it has to do it with no questions asked. This means that I excluded things like Planeswalker emblems that pump your whole board, since you have to do a considerable amount of work to use most of them. It also means that I have excluded Lords. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let me give you a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Vintage and Legacy Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's get to number 10. At number 10, it's Martial's Anthem. While 4 mana is kind of a lot for an Anthem effect, the added flexibility that Martial's Anthem brings as a result of having multi-kicker is pretty important. Sometimes Anthems are bad top decks if you don't have much of a board state, but if you have some mana lying around when you cast this, it can solve that problem for you by bringing some creatures back from the graveyard. In Standard, it was played as a singleton copy in aggro decks, and obviously, that's where all Anthems are really at their best. That's even more true in this case, because you don't need to do the multi-kicker for a crazy amount of mana to get something back if all of your creatures have low converted mana costs. The flexibility it brings is nice, but it is far too inefficient to ever see play in non-rotating formats, though a card like this, that gets better as the game gets longer, is pretty great in EDH. At number 9, it's Spear of Heliod. It costs exactly the same amount of mana as Glorious Anthem, and it comes with an extra ability, so it is pretty much strictly better than the Anthem, with the only possible downside of it being the fact that it is both an artifact, an enchantment, and legendary, which means more cards are capable of destroying it, and you can't have more than one of them in play, like you can with Glorious Anthem. Still, pumping your whole board for 3 is always solid, and being able to kill creatures is good too. Sure, you have to be dealt damage by the creature to destroy it, and people can definitely play around it to keep it from being that impressive, but it is still solid upside on an Anthem. It was played exclusively in White Weenie decks while it was in Standard. At number 8, it is Tristana Dissonance. While we mentioned that Martial's Anthem could sort of build its own army if you pump mana into it, Tristana Dissonance brings an army with her no matter what because she brings soldiers to the battlefield. On its own, the Discordant is 5 mana for 5/8 worth of stats, and they're usually even better than that because usually you have at least some board state by the time you play the Discordant. At first glance, the rest of the Discordant's text might seem irrelevant. I mean, how often do your opponents steal your creatures, right? Well, it turns out a decent amount of the time in the Standards Discordant has been part of, with Entrancing Melody being the biggest problem. The Discordant is the kind of card that both aggro and control decks are interested in, too. Aggro decks like to play it at the top of their curve, frequently ending the game or getting close to it when the Anthem effect comes down. Control decks, on the other hand, like the Discordant because it helps them catch back up on the board against aggressive opponents. 3 bodies that are decently sized does a decent job of stonewalling aggro decks. The Discordant has seen play in both Bant aggro and Bant control decks as a result, and it definitely has a shot at putting up some more points in Standard before it rotates. At number 7, it's Mirari's Wake, an Anthem that also doubles your mana. That's a lot of value for 5 mana, especially because it pays you back pretty quickly. Mirari's Wake decks dominated Worlds in 2003 with 4 top 8s at the event. The deck was more or less a control deck, but one that wanted to win the game with Decree of Justice. The Wake paired perfectly with it because it could let you pump a ton of mana into it, and it also made the creature tokens you made even larger. While Wake never again found success after Worlds in 2003, it was definitely the hottest deck around for a while that year. And number 6, it's the Immortal Sun. This card has a ton of text and every bit of it is pretty great. Pumping your whole team, drawing you extra cards, making your spells cost less, and turning off planeswalkers is definitely worth 6 mana. The abilities all pair together really well too. If your spell costs less and you're drawing extra cards, well, that means you're going to be rapidly adding creatures to the board who also happen to be larger thanks to the Anthem effect. This is an Anthem that definitely fits best in control decks though, because 6 mana is a ton for most aggro decks. Getting to 6 mana in control is way more likely, and this drawing you extra cards and making your spells cost less can go a long way towards winning you the game in the long run. It managed 9 points while in Standard, and it seems like a card that could have a shot in Pioneer going forward. And at number 5, it's the Anthem that started it all, Glorious Anthem. It first appeared in Urza's Saga back in 1998, and it has been reprinted several times since then in core sets. It didn't actually see any play in Urza's Block Standard. That was an incredibly powerful format, and something like the Anthem just didn't do enough. However, it did see play later on thanks to core set reprints. It was played a fair bit in the Standard between 2008 and 2009, primarily in black-white token decks. Anthem effects tend to be especially potent with tokens because cards that make tokens tend to give you more than one body with a single card, and the Anthem also gets more value since it's adding +2/+2 to the board for a single card instead of +1/+1. The Anthem hasn't seen play since 2009, and it seems like these days Wizards is pushing Anthems a lot harder, so I'm not sure if it would even see play if it were reprinted in a standard legal set in the future. At number 4, it's Angel of Invention. Like Tristana Discordant, the Angel can bring her own army with her thanks to the Fabricate mechanic. Fabricate gives you 2 pretty attractive options here. 5 mana for a 4/3 with flying, lifelink, and vigilance that pumps your whole board, or what is probably the more attractive option, 5 mana for a 2/1 with those keywords, and still pumps your whole board, including the 2 servos it brings into play. Both options have their place, but the one involving the tokens is more powerful most of the time. So this Angel is already pretty good, but the deck she was played in the most could really take advantage of the card. God Pharaoh's Gift decks were interested in loading up the graveyard and using the eponymous artifact to make copies of creatures there, and the Angel was a pretty nice one for that. If you had already played her and she'd left servos behind, and then you make a zombie token copy of her with God Pharaoh's Gift, you end up with a 4/4 that can potentially be a 6/6, or it can bring more servos back with it. God Pharaoh's Gift was one of the best decks in Standard for a while, and Angel of Invention was a big part of that. At number 3, it's Banalish Marshal, another card that makes Glorious Anthem look kind of silly. For the same amount of mana, although all 3 of it does have to be white, it pumps your whole team and brings you a 3/3 body. Now, we can't say it's strictly better since they are different card types and creatures do have a downside. They die more easily than enchantments, but the amount of value you were getting out of the Marshal is undoubtedly higher than Glorious Anthem in most scenarios. Obviously, the triple white cost means that the Marshal is pretty much restricted to only working out in mono-white aggro decks, but like in most standard formats, there were lots of good aggressive white creatures in the standard Banalish Marshal was a part of, so it found itself a pretty nice home in white weenie decks while it was in standard, and it's a card that will probably end up getting more points in the future thanks to the Pioneer format. At number 2, it's Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. The only card to make the list that gives a boost of more than +1/+1, Elesh Norn not only gives a massive boost to your team, but also weakens your opponent's creatures by -2/-2. This combination is often enough to swing a game wildly in your favor. The one downside, Elesh Norn costs 7 mana, but that's okay. This is Magic, and in Magic there are tons of ways to cheat an expensive creature into play. In Standard and Modern there was in Burial Rites, and in Legacy and Vintage there's Sneak Attack and Show and Tell, as well as a wide variety of powerful reanimation spells that have been used to bring back Elesh Norn. Elesh is one of the best reanimation targets in the entire game, and it's going to continue to see play in multiple formats going forward. And at number 1, and it isn't even very close, it's Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. I know, at the beginning I said Planeswalker emblems don't count for this list, but this is an exception. So what makes Gideon different? Well, the fact that he can use his ultimate right away when he comes down and give his team an Anthem. In other words, you don't really have to jump through hoops for this Anthem like you do for other Planeswalkers Anthems. This one is available right away if you want it. In addition to his emblem, Gideon can also, of course, turn himself into an indestructible creature, and he can make creature tokens. Both of those abilities pair pretty well with Gideon's emblem too, since in both cases, there are creatures. Gideon can get out of hand quickly, thanks to his ability to protect himself with creature tokens, and before long, he's given you more than enough value to warrant playing him. Gideon was utterly dominant while in Standard, to the point that there were lots of calls for him to be banned. His 144 points in Standard alone is pretty ridiculous, and he saw play in any deck that was playing white. He has gone on to success in other formats too, though, proving that he isn't the kind of card to do incredibly well in Standard and then disappear. In Modern, he has 6 points, primarily in Abzan and Junk decks. In Legacy, his primary home is Death and Taxes, and even sees play in Vintage, in Landstill decks. Gideon is almost certainly never going to give up the number 1 spot on this list, as he has a huge lead and just keeps adding to his score. Well, that does it for this edition of MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see the 230 MTG Top 10s I've already made, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.